systems and economies emerge from bottom-level processes. So this is the promise of this strategy, right? But what's the problem with this? Well, the problem is these are virtual laboratories. They're not actual laboratories, right? The promise is that we can do lots of studying of them. It's cheap. You know, this modeling is hard to do, but it's not nearly as hard to do as doing controlled experiments on large ecosystems, right? But the question is, we have here, when we recognize that what we're studying here, the virtual laboratory is that model system. Oops, no, that's not the button I meant to. Wait, is it not? No, anyway. Yes, the model system at the top.
The pointer.
Yeah. But
The middle.
I don't need it, right? Oh, never mind. I'm not going to use it. Okay. So that's our laboratory. Our laboratory is not the target. And our laboratory hopefully resembles the target, right? So I want to go back here and say, how does it resemble the target? And I think that when we look at these representational ideals, the representational ideals that are most important for IBMs are these two. The one causal one, the one that says we want to create a simple explanation of the causal, of the agents, the entities and their activities that are productive of this phenomenon, the things that make a difference. And the second is a model that, the second ideal is generality. Now, I think most people, I'm guessing, if you've been watching what we've been talking about IBMs today, would buy the one causal and would not buy the generality. And you know, one of the points I want to make about IBMs is that there really are different kinds of IBMs, right? That, and you know, there's a good example of this, and again, you know, Steve gave us a bunch of examples of very narrowly, you know, models that are very closely tied to actual, you know, to an actual habitat of an actual species of fish, and an actual, you know, stretch of river and all that kind of stuff. So those are these one causal ones. But the other kind, I think, I think you can also use agent-based models to gain this more general kind of understanding. And to respond somewhat to what Greg said, I think that more theoretical models can also exist in IBM world. And as an example of this, this model that some of you may be familiar with, the Boyd's model, which is a model of flocking behavior. And this is an old model, what, from 87? 1987. Everything in my talk seems to be from 1987 to 1989. Oops. So the Boyd's model is interesting because it's not about any particular actual species, right? And it explains at a macroscopic or at a rough level of description a very basic theoretical fact, which is that you can produce very realistic patterns of flocking behavior by relatively simple, by supposing that the animals in these in these flocks or in these schools are sensitive to the movements of things in their local neighborhood, right? And that just making some very simple assumptions about that will produce very you know, similar behavior, and it gives us a level of generality so that we can talk about multiple species, we can talk about multiple taxa, a very high level taxa, right? And we can also use it for making like video games and stuff like that. So, you know, that's generality, right? So although I think these are primarily where IBMs sit, you have choices, and you always have these choices in modeling. So now I'm going to leave you with a very general set of comments and an analogy. In thinking, going back to the beginning of this talk, here's the last slide. Thinking about this problem of dealing with generality and thinking about how helpful these models can be. And and the consequences of this particularity. And as I thought about this, I thought the ecologist is in a very similar position to a medical doctor. That the ecologist is seeking to take care of the world in the way that, or to take care of a part of the world in the way that a physician seeks to take care of a patient. And notice the following parallels. First of all, experimental knowledge is hard to obtain, it's fragmentary, and it's not always applicable to the patient. In medicine, there's actually a lot of experimental work done, right? But the way that that's typically done is via population-level studies, double-blind kinds of experiments. We know that sort of thing. So, and there's always the question is, and of course the effects are always going to be statistical, right? It's going to raise the probability, this might lower your blood pressure, and so on. But if it doesn't, it's because you were different, right? Same problem in ecology, right? Now ecology, of course, is much harder to do experiments for all the reasons that we know. But even when you can do experiments, you have fundamentally a very similar problem. The second thing is experimental knowledge must be complemented by careful observation of the patient. You have to pay attention to the individual case. You can't just come in and apply that knowledge. If you were thinking about a management decision, you have to pay attention to that. The third thing is that the study of models in both cases gives one a practical and risk-free way to get a feeling for how things work. And here when I'm talking about studying models, I'm actually going back to a somewhat different function of models than this narrow prediction stuff. I'm thinking about, if you're a doctor, one of the things that you do is you study models, and here we can talk about physical models, we can talk about cadavers, right? One of the things that you must do in medical school is you must cut up organisms, right? I guess biologists do this too, right? But you cut up organisms with an idea of understanding the structure. Now, you're not cutting up the people you'll treat, but it gives you, because of the similarities, a kind of feeling for the organism. And in general, how things work. And I think in the same way, we can use a model which is not directly parameterized to an actual system, but it's given us a general understanding of how things work, which can give us a kind of wisdom in making judgments. And this is the point. The application to knowledge, of this general knowledge to the particular case is as much art as science. The physician's art. I think you should start talking about the ecologist's art. And of course, here's just a final suggestion from the Hippocratic Oath. First, do no harm. So thanks very much.